All right, so this is my back to school early professional MacBook buyer's guide for mid 2022. And I feel like now is a good time to let you guys know how the MacBooks stack up this year and which ones I recommend and which one I would personally own. But you know who recommended me to make this video? Our sponsor. Nobody. So I have three computers here, the M1 MacBook Air, the M2 MacBook Air, and then the beloved 14-inch MacBook Pro. Probably the three most talked about laptops right now in terms of the MacBook space. And this is going to be a brief overview of these laptops and a few others as well. We'll leave those in the honorable mention section. I have detailed reviews on my channel for each device. The M2 Air is coming up shortly, or I should say soon, but let's get started with my favorite laptop on the table, which is the M1 MacBook Pro. It's the M1 MacBook Air, idiot. The M1 MacBook Air. This laptop, believe it or not, is a year and a half old at this point, approaching 2 years. This is actually my main laptop for personal use and even editing videos for the past year of content on this channel, including this video that you're watching right now. And it's one of my go-to laptops that I recommend to people once they reach that $800 to $1,000 price point. As a matter of fact, I can probably end the video right here because for school and even early in your career, this is the perfect laptop. But let's talk about a few things that the M1 MacBook Air has. So we have this old school display where it's just a rectangle, whereas the newer models have this notch at the top. Personally, not that big of a deal for me, but I know some people complain about the bezels not being big enough. I think to each their own. We have two Thunderbolt 4 ports and a headphone jack. There's no MagSafe, which is a bummer, so keep that in mind if you want a magnetic charger. Also, we are limited to one external display. I know that is a question that keeps on popping up. This is the slowest out of the bunch, but in terms of other laptops in this category, the M1 chip still stands ahead of its class because it's just crazy performant in terms of the efficiency that it can produce. Now, I know the Dell XPS 13 Plus and the i7P series exist, but you have to keep in mind the price and that this chip and laptop, once again, is approaching 2 years of age. So it really shows a testament of time of how great this laptop was a year and a half ago. Honestly, for high school students, this is pretty overkill, but for college students and even early in your professional career, like I said before, this laptop is going to be great for most of your needs. Pretty much all computer tasks you throw at it, it will handle it in silence because do keep in mind, the MacBook Airs have no fan at all. And on top of that, the battery life on this laptop might leave you shocked when you have long nights finishing up an assignment with a group or doing last minute things for your job. The M1 Air just does it, no problem. The speakers combined with the microphone make it great for video calls or virtual meetings. Camera is okay, just make sure you have good lighting. Now, an honorable mention as we move up in price point is going to be the M1 MacBook Pro. And the only reason I would recommend purchasing that laptop is if you care about battery life. Personally, I don't see the value in the battery life in the M1 MacBook Pro because you're essentially getting most of the performance with the MacBook Air. It's just you have longevity on how long you can use the laptop without a charger. But I just don't think that many people will benefit from being away from a charger for that extended period of time. Like I would say most people are going to be around some type of outlet, whether they're out and about somewhere. So that's why I really wouldn't recommend the M1 MacBook Pro, but it is there as an honorable mention. And I would say if you are looking to get the M1 MacBook Pro, I would spec it up similarly as the M1 MacBook Air. Now let's move up to the new kid on the block, the M2 MacBook Air. The kid with the most controversy this year, next to Drake's questionable albums. No, but seriously, when we move up in price, we move up to the M2 MacBook Air. And looking on the outside of the device, you might notice that nothing has really changed. We still have our single headphone jack, our two Thunderbolt 4 ports, and now our beloved MagSafe. Now, MagSafe on MacBooks aren't that big of a selling point for me now, since USB-C is what Apple converted us to, but MagSafe is an option. The display is brighter with the MacBook Air logo disappearing at the bottom here, which gives it a more clean design. We also have this notch at the top, which wraps around the top of windows whenever you're using the laptop. We also have two additional colors as well. Midnight, which is the one we have in front of me, and Starlight, because it seems like Apple's trying to get into the galaxy for colors. I still think the colors that Apple has put out for the MacBook Air are probably some of the best colors since Space Gray and Silver. We have an updated camera and microphone, which some might say sound and look better than the M1 MacBook Air. Now, I've already made a video on the SSD issue and the controversies for the M2 MacBook Air, so if you want my full unedited 20-minute thoughts, which I highly recommend, you should go check out that video. But overall, I think this is an okay refresh coming from the M1 MacBook Air. The only reason I would recommend buying the M2 MacBook Air is A, if you want the latest and greatest of what Apple has to offer, B, you don't have M1 already, and C, the colors. Because other than that, there's no real reason I can think of why a person should pick up the M2 MacBook Air, especially when price is a big factor for most people. And now let's talk about the elephant in the room. But before we do, I gotta change my background because I don't really like the snow being behind me. That's perfect. Now, elephant in the room, MacBook Pro 14-inch. Now, some people might be wondering why I would recommend a $2,000 laptop for school. To answer that question, I don't, with a small asterisk. So you see, with all the upgrades people are doing with M2, such as the storage and the RAM, basically slapping on another $400 to the price tag, you enter in the territory of the discounted 14-inch MacBook Pro for around the same price, if not the same price. And I'm not here to buy into Apple's strategic marketing that, oh, since I'm at this price point, I might as well upgrade to the newer device. The only reason I bring this up is because if you are truly considering upgrading specs for M2, I should say upgrading specs in multiple categories for M2, you might as well get the 14-inch MacBook Pro. You get a sharper display, and I always make the argument that with screen sizes this small, resolutions don't matter, but for sharpness and clarity of text, it really does go a long way, especially as a person who codes myself. I'm sure people who write a lot of papers or who stares at text a lot on a display, you know how sharpness and clarity really does make a difference on, I would say, your eye strain. You also get ProMotion as well, more I/O, such as an extra Thunderbolt port on the opposite side and an SD card slot, which is good for content creators who use an actual camera. And I guess if you decide to pick this up in college and your content career takes off, you can just, I don't know, drop out and use that SD card slot for life. Anyway, the M1 Pro does laps around the M2 MacBook Air. Get it? Laptop does laps. That will top. Anyway, it's just a better machine overall for around the same price when you decide to spec up the M2. Do I recommend this laptop? Absolutely not. If you are a rich kid and your parents buy you this laptop, my advice is this. Say thank you first, because they're nice and you shouldn't be a spoiled brat, but return it to Apple, buy the M1 machine because that's really all you need, take the excess money and invest it. At least that's what I would do. Or you can go to a party, blow it all away, whatever kids do these days. Just don't do drugs. At least not publicly. Actually, don't do drugs. Actually, do whatever you want. You can afford to make mistakes at your age. I can too. Now, another honorable mention is going to be the iPad. Yes, the iPad. Where is my iPad? That thing's probably dead in a corner somewhere. Oh, I see it. So if you want to be hip and cool, you can get yourself an iPad with the Magic Keyboard. But if you have an assignment or task that doesn't open on the iPad, all I can say is this: I told you so. It's not a computer, it's an iPad. Don't let Apple fool you. But hey, some people want to be cool and hip, and I can't fault them for that, because the iPad is a really nice device if most of your tasks can be done on them. Just keep in mind you should get some type of case or cover, because your display has a higher likelihood of cracking and getting scratches. Now, which one would I choose as a first-time buyer? This might shock some people, but I'm actually gonna go with M2. I just prefer the newer design with the display, and I'm already on the next generation of chip by Apple, so I feel comfortable being on a machine that has, I would say, longer support than the M1 Air. But I will say, if parents aren't budging or your budget is capped at a certain point, the M1 MacBook Air is still a fantastic machine in terms of performance and pretty much rivals M2. But the 14-inch, I mean, it really is overkill. I was going to say if you're getting your masters, but even then, the M1 and M2 are still plenty capable. So with that being said, I would get M2, but if budget constraints were a thing, I would get the M1 without any day, and I would not regret my decision at all. So hopefully you got, is my background still moving? Yeah, thank God. Anyway, hopefully you guys found this video informative. I appreciate every single sub, like, and comment. M2 Air coming soon. As always, guys, much love. Boop, boop, boop. I have 3 MacBooks for